President, today when the chaplain opened the Senate, he prayed for divine guidance to end the paralysis of analysis in Congress. I thought it was an excellent point, and when I heard the two leaders speak today, I realized where that paralysis really was. We were paralyzed by analyzing our differences and failing to look at what we've reached common ground on already. I have been worried about a default on our debt for some time, but right now I'm worried about Congress defaulting on our country. Failure should not be an option for us in this case, and it's time we started finding common ground. So for the purpose of discussion, I really want to put forward some thoughts about where we agree, some identification of where we don't, but where we could be. We've already agreed in one form or another, whether it was the Vice President's group or the Speaker's group or whoever, that we ought to have $1 trillion down payment and initial cuts to bring about deficit reduction. And there's common agreement between both sides in the Senate and I think in the House as well, that we need a short-term committee equally divided in a partisan way to come up with at least another $1.8 trillion that results in reductions in debt and in deficit. We've agreed on those two things. Third, we've agreed that we don't want to default on our debt. There may be a handful of people around here who think that's a good idea, but with all due respect, it's not a good idea. And the ramifications of default are already showing themselves in small measures in the markets, but will show themselves a lot greater next Wednesday if we fail. Now, where do we differ? We don't differ on raising the debt ceiling. We just differ on when we raise it, how we raise it, and how long we raise it. The President favors raising it past the election in November of 2012. There are others who want to have votes every 6 months or 10 months. Quite frankly, there is something to be said for waiting until after the November election of 2012. So we have 18 months of stability and predictability in the United States of America. There's not the uncertainty of us coming back. There's a lot of differences on the other side about whether we have a constitutional amendment on the balanced budget vote. And quite frankly, I can't understand why in the end anybody would reject both bodies being able to have a vote in regular order on a constitutional amendment to balance the budget. We are supposed to vote. We're supposed to confront those decisions. And I think an agreement could be reached between those two differences that would ensure us moving closer to an agreement on the entire package. And then third, and probably toughest, we don't disagree on the committee that's appointed to find the 1.8 or better in savings and cuts, but we disagree on the mechanism in which that is enforced. And I want to talk about that for a minute. There's a fear, and a lot of it's justified because of the way we're acting right now, that if you had a committee of 12, 6 Democrats and 6 Republicans, charged with finding $1.8 trillion or more in reductions, they'd never agree, therefore they'd be gridlocked, therefore those reductions would not take place. And I understand that fear and agree with the concern for that fear. So you need a mechanism where there's a risk for them to do that. One of the discussions that's been floating around was last night, a discussion I had, in fact, with the presiding officer right now, is you allow the Congress itself to allow an equal number of Democrats and Republicans of some accountable number, like 10 or 20, to come together if the committee fails to make its recommendations and make alternative recommendations that must, by requirement of the law, be voted on the floor of the House and Senate. Now, if for some unbelievable circumstance that didn't happen, there has to be an absolute fail-safe to ensure that failure is not an option. I have suggested automatic sequestration, and I know that causes heartburn with some. But somewhere there's a silver bullet. The Lone Ranger had it. Tonto had it. Wyatt Earp had it. Why can't the U.S. Congress find it? Why can't we find that magic bullet that is the enforcement mechanism that ensures we come together on the $1.8 trillion or more? If we do those things, we have an agreement. We've already agreed in principle on most of them, and we understand our differences on the ones we haven't agreed on. We ought to be spending the next 24 hours finding out where our differences are and coming to find common ground, because we are not that far apart. So I want to go back to the prayer of Barry Black this morning. And I listen to his prayer just about every morning because it's very insightful. In fact, there's a clear message in it. And he's usually talking to all of us because he watches all of us. And he's concerned, and I'm concerned. I have 3 children and 9 grandchildren. I've said in my campaigns the rest of my life is about leaving them a country that is as prosperous, as free, and as great as the country my parents left me. If we blink on this issue that's before us, that's not going to be the case. There's irreparable harm that can come from a failure to act. And it doesn't harm me as a politician, it harms my kids and my grandkids. And it harms those people I know that are on Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. And it harms those people I know that are standing right now on a firing line somewhere in Afghanistan, realizing today could be their last day on this earth so America could live to see another day. That's how serious the consequences are. So, Mr. President, I would suggest that instead of being paralyzed by our analysis of where we differ, let's become analysis of where we find common ground. And we do on not raising the debt ceiling. We know we should raise it. We know we can find up to $2.8 trillion and hopefully more in cuts in the deficit and spending over time. We know for a fact we have to extend the debt ceiling to some point in time. And if it's past the presidential election of 2012, let's ensure that each body, in regular order, can vote on a constitutional amendment to balance the budget. Which leaves us with one difference. And that difference is, what is the enforcement mechanism on the $1.8 trillion cut that the Joint Committee, equally divided, is supposed to come on? I submit we can find the common ground to find the silver bullet that causes that to happen. And I would encourage all of us to forget now where we differ, to recognize where we agree, and then work on building a bridge on those differences so the United States of America doesn't default on its debt, and the Congress of the United States does not default on its obligation to the people of the greatest country on the face of this earth, the United States of America. Mr. President.